당도 아양 데르와다 가상 안주시에디 최탐제 당아질의 랑유 라신이 주바세디 요마레스 다 라신이 줍나 간스고스네 아니 바 셴라 마되바 르파 샤발라 마되바 아니 그런 거니 줍되 가지고 그래스 데네 지여바이나 단 유어줘야다 아니 지 야줘야다 두줘야 가요 요마레 데네 산다 권니마 간스여는 다가랑하신 주죠 그래서 데네지 라신 주바세 다 데네지 여러베스네 먼저 심주체나 데네스에는 최간에시나 데네스 요 말이었어 그래서 지기 현실의 뛰는 현실의 뛰파 뢰샤바 점유여바시마도 안을 뢰파 마샤바 간라 마되바지 요 자와기네 예민도스 지사 라신 주바세디 단담디비 온도 제나야 예민도 안에 군주비 온도 제바네 다 예민도 와서 온도스네 가상가 주디 거시래
Good morning. Last night we continued to look at that all phenomena, without exception, lack inherent existence. There's no phenomenon that is existent by way of its own nature. There's no phenomenon that is self-existent. If a phenomenon were self-existent or existent by way of its own nature, that would have the consequence that it would be independent. So unconnected, fixed, static, not influenced by anything at all, and it would be unchanging, meaning it couldn't improve or degenerate. And when we investigate, we come to recognize this or find this for ourselves, that there is no phenomenon that can be found that exists inherently. Rather, all phenomena exist as mere imputations by mind. And this is the case for the wide variety of conventional phenomena, as well as the ultimate phenomenon of emptiness.
현실의 뒤에서 발로 따봐 현실의 뒤에 주바 지어들었어. 지난 현래 모두랑 문을 주바티 동바레스 지사딘 그런 모디 강라에 모두로 샤발라 모두바 디기 샤마드네 주바디기 동바 차려서 아니 다 동바인자 아니 간지어서 현실의 뒤에 연구해서
Investigating phenomena, coming to recognize for ourselves that no phenomenon, whether conventional or ultimate, exists inherently. Come to recognize that the essence of phenomena, the entity, the essence of phenomena, is emptiness. Phenomena are empty of existing inherently. And rather, the way they exist is as dependent arisings, in particular, dependent on imputation or labeling by mind.
데니마 다지링 가사 된다 셰바데다 된다 직바데마 안도 직마 쉐디 데네 셰 최남 랑게 친이담 모니 예나 파비 냠샤 모비 지규 타와세 균 직대 용거래제 데네 타니 덴바 리비치스도 타와세 아네 돈남 버게와 미카바 타와 송싱스네 데네게다 대시 Let's
turn to the text, to the middle of page 16. Here we find 3 points which sequentially summarize the verses of Chandakirti above. Thus, Chandakirti is saying that a consequence of phenomena existing by their own essence or characteristics is that an Arya's meditative equipoise realizing emptiness would cause the eradication of phenomena. Another consequence would be that conventional truths would stand up to recent analysis. A further consequence would be that production would not be ultimately refuted.
파베 냠샤 이셰디 ngobo tamji ngobo jibi gyucharu kures gyuchagres 제가 데니게 gyung kore 제가 파베 냠자데 ngobo jibi gyumaro was gyumarede 라신이 줍되 받아 랑이 생이 줍어 여봐나 파베 냠자시 ngobo jibi gyuchagres 파베 냠자이시 여러분 ngobo jibi ngobo 매바서에 gyumaro 와 gyumaro 이나 라신이 줍되 받아 랑이 생이 줍어 여봐이나 근데 밥에 냠셔도 뭐 매봐서요 규차로 그래서 규엔디 규차 되는게 규 타로 그래서 그래서 규 말에 규 되는게 규차야기 규엔디도 연구를 했어요. 규차로 그래서 또 나디래. 뭐 배치규 타 왔어야 돼.
A consequence of phenomena existing by their own essence or characteristics is that an arya's meditative equipoise realizing emptiness would cause the eradication of phenomena. As this says quite clearly, that if phenomena did exist by way of their own defining characteristics or by way of their own essence, then, so if one asserts that this was the case, then when an Arya being is in meditative equipoise, realizing emptiness, because no such essence could be found, that meditative equipoise would become a cause for eradicating or eliminating phenomena. But this is not the case. The meditative equipoise of an Arya being is not a cause for eradicating phenomena.
당보지 여바지라 안 지제기 빼나가 주기 거류 주여바지 당보 거류 약보 주여바지 아니 그 당보 여바지 디제려야 토와지 케제 직동네 곧 중배 주럽서셔바네 거류 매와 차송으로 지산 거류 매와 차기 제디 게임 가르쳐 버렸은 토와디기 게임 제제 쉬니 게임 제반자 아니 거류 매와서 지산 거류 매와 차기 대진예를 여바지 된 토와디 쉬시 매와 차에도 토와디 그르유디 매버서요 규차송아 베디나신 나 라신 주바세데 랑인 생유 주바세데 여바이나 당보 여바체 여바이나 안다 동방에 또베 제바체체 donamlo 주베 리베 제바체 간데 두미도 심주지 봐 심주지 제도 갑라 안 타메 타줘라 랑문의 주베 동베 동상진이 걸마다 랑문의 주바데 매바 동고 말 매바 차로 걸어와 제가 매바 차로 동고 말에 세상 강도에 대 동방이 또요도 랑원의 주변 롱어들 매바 차로 대신 아주 로를 능고데 이내 그 동방이 제바치 동방이 또요 무슨도 또요도 디용어들 랑원의 주바데 랑의 친유 주바세 랑원의 주바세 매바 차로 거래 제가 파베 냠자 이시 동방이 무슨 또 별로도 기용도 아니 랑의 친유 주바데 랑원의 주바도 통민도 민도와스 제가 대신예를 여바이나 대신예만 여바이나 다디고서 매바차르데 파베냠제시 고 매바서 유다다 차기도 와서 제가 규차그래 대대 규마로 와서 제가 파라신 유튜버세 랑친 유튜버 당보 코로나 요 말했어 제가 당보 여바제 파베냠제시 동반 용선도 매바차바 있나 파베냠제시 고 매바치 규차로 그래요 제가 이 규마레스 고 당보 니네 코요 말했어 올라
If it's asserted that a phenomenon exists by way of its own essence or nature or characteristics, and this is how it exists, then when an Arya being realizes emptiness, they would realize emptiness by recognizing that phenomena are empty of existing by way of their own essence, by way of their own nature or their own defining characteristics, which means the phenomena would be destroyed. This previously self-existent phenomenon would be destroyed by the Arya being's direct realization of emptiness. The consequence then is that something that was held to formerly exist would now become non-existent. It would become non-existent through the power of or caused by the wisdom realizing emptiness. So that by means of the wisdom realizing emptiness, something that was held to previously be self-existent will be found to be non-existent. And the analogy that's often used here is if you have a cup and this exists. Take a hammer and use this as a cause for destroying the cup, no more cup, because, or by means of the hammer, the cup is destroyed. Similarly, if one holds that phenomena exist by way of their own essence or nature, then an Arya being's direct realization of emptiness would destroy what was formerly held to exist.
Tene towa digi pa kariyu pa dungji ma chaba ne, da towa digi kariyu di meba suyo re zang, kariyu meba chayi gyu di towa charwa. Dangbo nine kariyu gyu ni meba ina, an towa di kariyu meba suyo gyu re besi ne, ku gyu cha yo ma, kariyu koro yo ma, dangbo koro yo ma re. Chisa ko meba suyo gyu cha bala dangbo yo ba che, tene digi towa digi kien che che, kariyu di meba suyo ba yin zang, towa di kariyu meba suyo gyu cha go re. Ma to dangbo nine kariyu di meba ina, towa yoban towa de kariyu meba suyo gyurebes, tele kariyu minduwa meba suyo gyurebes ne, di gyu maro khor dangbo khor no yo mares. Di nashi rangshin dhruba da rangin tsingin dhruba da dangbo nini yo mares. Khor gyune dhru manyo mares. Manyo waza pabe nyamsha ishe digi cheba che tongpa nyi to yung gore. Tongpa nyi to yung du, tongpa nyi ngosum da tong yung du, pabe nyamsha ishe digi rangin tsingin dhruba da rangshin dhruba de meba suyo yo mares kasi. Meba suyo gyucha yo mares. What
is being challenged here is the view that phenomena exist by way of their own essence or nature or characteristics. And if that were so, when it was realized by an Arya being that the phenomenon is empty of existing by way of its own essence, nature or characteristics, the wisdom realizing emptiness would have destroyed something that was held previously to be self-existent. Just like a cup exists and a hammer destroys it. In the same way, if that the phenomenon, such as a cup, existed by way of its own essence, then just like a hammer would destroy that cup, the wisdom realizing emptiness of an Arya being would destroy something that was previously held to be self-existent. Whereas on the other hand, when one recognizes that no phenomenon is established by way of its own essence, nature, or defining characteristics, then the wisdom realizing emptiness would not destroy any phenomenon, because one never believed a phenomenon to be self-existent. So when one realizes that phenomena are not self-existent, there is nothing to destroy, because nothing was held to be self-existent.
Dong kunzu de se cha gong lo ji zan de ne gi ko kunzu den ba pe ne bum ba la so ba da ji su da da ji ro ba ji ro la so ba cha sa rang yong wen ne zhu ba yin na ko kunzu den ba de rang yong wen ne zhu ba yin na an de gang la ya ma de ba ko rong ji ge yu gi ne zhu ye me ting ji ko da ga ra ne gu ro ba de da ga ra ne gu yo ba yin na de ne pa ba nyam je ji ko ri bi ge ten ji ge nam je ge je ba che de du min de je ba che de an ko nie gu ro ba nie gu ro ba ye na 지사디 니기미도 와스 지사 데고 템버 주부 랑싱 주되베이나 데네 리비게 파 템버 주모르 제바지 리비 제용데 갑라 코 니오레스 제수 타와서야 돼 제수도 타와라도 제수 발라나 코 제바지나 코 다가라 니 되바딜라 제수 바시 고래 코 제바지도 매바 차송만에 제미수 바체 고래 지사 코 수자리 디 롤로소바 랑싱 주되베이나 ko tanyi de bare cha de tanyi de bare ji zan tan ko ran su de je tanyi bare wa tanyi be chue re ji zan du chin de ne ran xin du ban den de ge da ge ri be je ba je de ka la an ko nye hu hu re di nye ba na tanyi de ba de ko ri be je se cha ge se de dong yu do bi ge lue yu cha ru re se wo re ji zan ri be je se ta wa se di su wo re je ba je be ka la 就是借人的结发钱哇， Dona Rashing droop do me to Jeba Jedu Kabla, and you got near the Jesebare, Mani Bachana James Zubacha.
And the second point, another consequence would be that conventional truths would stand up to reasoned analysis. So first, just to say as an aside, the word I've translated as stand up to is literally the word for patience. So one could perhaps use another synonym. Another consequence would be that conventional truths would forbear reasoned analysis or withstand reasoned analysis. Perhaps that's clearer. So again, let's commentary. If phenomena were established by way of their own defining characteristics or were inherently existent, then they would be conventional truths. And when one searches, investigates, analyzes these phenomena, whatever that phenomenon may be, whether it's an object of form such as a cup or a sound or a smell, and so forth, when one investigates the conventional truth, one should find the object. One should find its defining characteristics, its nature by which it is established. It should be findable. Why? Because if something is inherently existent, it means it is unchanging. So it's not going to change, and therefore it should be findable. It should, and to express that differently, it should be findable. It should withstand reasoned analysis, or it should withstand logical analysis. In other words, when one is looking for the essence by which a phenomenon is believed to be established, one should find that. But instead, no such essence is found. And therefore, such a phenomenon doesn't forbear or withstand reasoned analysis. Because the essence or the nature is not found. It does not withstand ultimate analysis. Because the essence is not found.
Di kangbe nanglo de yeba ina nganzu dimi di kawa tu se pa chik chasa pa ze di kabla ze ne chik tu ze na ni gi yoba ina da ko ze jeba ji de yu du mi de jeba ji de ni yo na ane je sue ba cha gi ro ba de ni gi jeba je ka ze na ze ne ni yu ne mi na ane je mi sue ba ro je ne ane ni gi yo ma ro di na yin si ora su da su la so ba di ju che kan de na ra xin drup de ba ina drup mi de jeba ji de kabla 동반이 제바도 지단 탐에 타셔들라 동반이 또 불러지 기용도 가르쳐서 랑신 주변 동바지 또 뭐래 랑신 주변 동상이 또 그러마도 동상이 또 뭐도 수코로 통고 말에 되는 수 랑신 주변에 또 그거 말에 제 동상이만 또 오면도 니또 매반자 수디 랑신 주변에 수코로 다랑 교육이 매바디 뒤에 통고 말와 진짜 니 재미스 봐차로 진짜 디 랑신이 줍대 봐 있는 거 ni gure ine cheba chidu kale ni gi mindu was chesang ko rashi mebe tare so chesang anzu chala ba dinam che ka che na ni me na dinado chala de mebe tare yue na che ne ni guru was chesa yue na ni yong res chesa ni yo ba ni gi me so ko mebe tare dina shi sukti ge rashi drup de ba ine cheba chidu kale ni gure to gure na tame ta chul cheba chidu suk rashi drup ma 동배 동산 도마도 수 라시 도 그런 도움이 도와서 제가 재미수 말해서 제가 수 라시 마주베 따래서 세고다 데미디 강배 날에 데미지 여바 있나 파 제제 니 여바나 되네 곧니 투고 여바 따로 근데 강배 날에 데미지 매바나 같이 제비네 미 제비네 추제 돈에 가는 제비네 윤 라야 말와 제가 그 매비기 김생인자 라기요 말와
To use an illustration that we're probably all familiar with, if we need to go out, but before going out, we have to find our key so we can lock our home, but we can't find our key, so we search everywhere. and research and research and research, and if it were to, our key were to exist in a particular room, we should find it. If it doesn't exist in that room, it won't be found. So similarly, if an object exists inherently or naturally by its own nature, when we investigate that object, seeking its nature, it should be found, because this is the nature or the essence that establishes the object. And if it is found, that object, its nature, would have withstood our analysis. But this is not the case. Rather, the object is found to be empty of its own nature. Empty of its own nature. And therefore, the object does not withstand our analysis, because it's not found. Rather, what is recognized is the object is empty of existing inherently. So again, if phenomena existed in the way that they appear, when one seeks out their self-existence, what establishes them, their essence, their nature, should be found. It should withstand that analysis. But it does not withstand that analysis. Rather, objects are found to be empty of existing in the way they appear.
Ranshin Druba in a Donna Druba, Ranshin Druba in Chikbares. Chesa, Donna Druba, and a quote Galam, Koron, Rangon, Druba, Donna Druba, and Rangon Druba Chakores. Rangon Drusobana, and quote Kedina Yobarima, the Meva Chagmares. Chesa Kara, Ranji Karangi, and the Che Sura Sudan Jajil of Chetamje, Ranshin Drubare, Donna Madrubari Legores. Chesa 결혼기 라싱이 두바를 납나 어 돈도 버 두바 차로 있네 돈도 버 두바디 매바 팔롱을 까 투야요 말해서 그래 라지비 갈라고스네 돈도 버 두바다 라시 두바니 카가 제거로 와 라싱이 두바세다 생이 두바세니 찍바지 근데 덴버 두바당 돈도 버 두바세 찍바지 근데 라지비게 예와 치거로 와 땡유발라 찍바로 와 Tenjubalana Ranshin Druba, Demba Druba, Don number Drubalana, Chazan Dunda Jibari, whatever Yomare. The Ranji Bigala was in Don number Druba, then Demba Druba said that's our Yomares and Yomares. In a Ranshin Druba, that and it's in Druba, the Yores and the Kebachiware. Tis another Ranji Bigala was on Sukta, Ridro, Chek, and the Chine, Rangitini Druba, Ranshin Drubares. And then Don number Druba Mare, Demba Druba Mares, the Gorba. Is not that? Is not cause Sutra Dirolo about Don number Druba Yomare, Demba Druba Yomare Lagor, that Ranji Birua, Yomare Lagore. That Hindu Bigala was in a Curon, Don number Druba Yomare, and Demba Druba Yomare Legid was. And Curon Ranshin Druba Legid was, Sudan, judges of Ranshin Druba Legid was. Ranshin Druba in that Don number Druba Chadu, it's not Don number Druba Curongi, Donum. Tomba to be Louis Pagagres and the cow to Yameva Chadu, yes, or that Dondala, Donda by your amiba. Tomba to be Lodi Karaka was and Demba Druba de Gagorova, the Rangi Bilula, Demba Druba, the Donda Druba Gagorova, Tomba Yitoide. Says not that Gagor Coronzi killing Gorova, the Rangi Bigi killing Gorova. Says that Tinju Bigi, Kurangi, Tomba to be Lodi, Donda Druba de Kegiri, Demba Druba Kegiri like do us. And then Ranshin you droop the way, and the Demba droop the earth, and the Kayomares. Says the dealer, don't number me have a tower, said the Curant and the Kaya never check his order. There is a
Then moving to the third point, which is with reference to the verse that we looked at last night, a further consequence would be that production would not be ultimately refuted. To understand this then, let's remind ourselves of the synonyms that Svatvantika assert. So they say, two sets of two terms are synonymous with each other. So the Svatantika say phenomena firstly that true existence and ultimate existence are synonymous, and no phenomenon exists in this way, truly or ultimately. But how phenomena do exist is inherently or established by way of their own defining characteristics. This is how phenomena exist. An inherent existence and established by way of its own defining characteristics are synonymous. And then true existence and ultimate existence, these two are synonymous, but phenomena do not exist in this way. For the Prasangika, all four of those terms are synonymous, and no phenomenon exists in any of these ways. That's according to Prasangika. On that basis, then, they argue with Svatantika, stating that a further consequence would be that production would not be ultimately refuted. And this is because the Svatantikas say that the wisdom realizing emptiness eliminates or eradicates the belief in true existence, or its synonym, ultimate existence. So, again, when the Svatantikas say, when emptiness is realized, one realizes the phenomenon is empty of true existence, empty of ultimate existence. That's the meaning of emptiness. Prasangika say, but the inherent existence or the inherent establishment that you assert, the wisdom that realizes emptiness, would also disprove that. In the same way that ultimate existence is disproved, so too is inherent existence disproved by that same wisdom that realizes emptiness.
Yum Dondra Nishunga Bale, so the Sanyu Jumnendiki, that Sumpiki Yum Dondra Nishunga Passedia, Delia. Dondra Nishunga Balan, 6 years, Dondra Nida, Casa Dondra Nishanga, your resort, Dondra Nishunga, but 6 years, Dondra Nishanga, your resort. Kasi Sholok, 6 years, Sholok, Dondra Nishanga, you can do a chick or Delia, Dondra Nishunga Pares. Dina de Carasum, Shara Dudipu, Ndila, Janchu Semba, Semba Chimbo, Shara Yeparu de Chimbala, Jubitse, Janchu Semba, Yanda Brasis, Mitongos.
So those 3 bullet points then serve as a recap at what we've looked at the last 2 weekends with those in those 3 verses. So now moving on, still on page 16, the 25,000 stanza perfection of Wisdom Sutra, a Mother Sutra, says, concerning this, Shariputra, when a bodhisattva, a great being, practices the perfection of wisdom, he does not see a bodhisattva as real.
Yum Dondra Nishunga Basine, Yum Lamna Anzuki, Shesuna, Jidan, Chitin Pave, Yum Lana Ama, Tilagurua. Is not Digi that Yum Sedi, Garasene, Anzuki Jidai, the Ama Sedi, Anzu Mipege, the Yagetra, the Puge, the Amalet in the Kegurua, and didn't do Sine, Ngurua. Jidan Dinashi, Anzuki, Topa, the Sanjo Kotoya, and the Lam Guliki, Yakoni, want to Pewade, Tomba to be sheriff. So Yum said, I did Yum said, Tomba to be sheriff. You Tomba to be sheriff, Yum Siore. Just a Tomba to be sheriff, Kumbala, Tene, and the Lamdiki, Yakoni, want to Pesha, and the Sanji Tapa Tamchi Koba, get to your Yum said. Just another Tonda Nishunga said, the Niki Sholo, Tonda Nishunga, Karatingor in Geshe Thubten Rabten Sungo, Daddy, Donama, Tombani Jaya, Tombani, the Tombani Topic, Chamber, Tombani Tanka Sungo, Chesa, Yum Donda Nishungaba, said, Chesa Yum Donda Nishungaba, the Ku Geshe de la Donda Nishungaba, Nishuzana Digi, Dodigi, Geshe Carrella, Tombani Jaya, yes,
a woman is called a mother, independence on giving birth to a child. So it's independence on one's mother that one is born and can grow. So hence the term mother is used in reference to certain sutras or classes of sutra, because those sutras teach explicitly the wisdom realizing emptiness. And it's the wisdom realizing emptiness that enables one to develop further, or to further develop the mental paths in one's continuum, which are indispensable to progress towards and eventually attain Buddhahood. So therefore, sutras such as the 25,000 stanza Perfection of Wisdom Sutra is called a Mother Sutra because it teaches emptiness. And emptiness is, or the wisdom realizing emptiness, is what enables one to progress along the varying mental paths that are required in order to become a Buddha.
Dila and Garson Warres in Janju Semba, Semba Chimbo, Sheraja Paro the Chimbola Jubi, Sedu, Janju Semba, said the Chidan Janju Semba, Jansum Gilo Giti, and Dila Janju Semba, Janju Semba Papa, and Sosuki when you go in Gurua, Janju Semba, Semba Chimbo, Janju Semba Pape Kansa Sura. Chesa, the Nigga Pape Chimbo Tigi, and Semba Chimbo, Tomba, Sheraja Paro the Chimbola Jubi, Sheraja Paro the Chimba, Sedu. And the part of the chimbal Dugor, Jimbe part of the chimba, Jimba, Sudun, Serva, something, Sheriffs Dugor, Passion to in Yam, Dina Neda, Tamashera part of Chimba, Sherching part, Sheriff part of the Chimba, Domban Dobigi, and Yamlin Jebig, Jibbe says it in Yamlin Jebig, Public Judges Semba, Public Gansati, yes, or the nigger Yamlin Jedida, Yamlin Jedo, or Dombani, Osum, Dombani, Yamba Shadu, just Dombani to it, together. Janju Semba, Yang Dabachi, Mitongo, said the Nigi, Janju Semba de Game, and go Rangi when you Jubadi, Dogo Marias, Rang when you do Dongsang Dogma, Rang when you do Dongbody Dogma, Rang when you do Jubadi, Tongo Marisi, Yang Dabachi, Midon said, Yang Daba said, Rang when you Juba. The Mitong said the Dogo Maris, just Rang when you do Donga de Mato, Rang when you do Donga Tongo Maris.
Now to the start of the quotation, concerning this Shariputra, when a bodhisattva, a great being, practices the perfection of wisdom, so here, bodhisattvas we know refer to both ordinary bodhisattvas and Arya bodhisattvas. And when we have the term a great being, then this would refer to an Arya bodhisattva, a bodhisattva who has directly realized emptiness. So when a bodhisattva practices the perfection of wisdom, so amongst the 6 perfections that bodhisattvas practice, the 6th one is that of wisdom, with the first 5 being generosity, ethical restraint, patience, joy, perseverance, and concentration. So here it refers to a bodhisattva engaging in meditating on and realizing emptiness directly, practices the perfection of wisdom. A bodhisattva in meditative equipoise, realizing emptiness directly. And at that time, then the verse continues, or the text continues, he does not see a bodhisattva as real. So when in meditative equipoise on emptiness, all that appears is emptiness. No self-existent phenomenon, or naturally existent, or a phenomenon established by way of its own essence appears. Only emptiness appears.
Sheba is the Dipalaya Manguya Yanda Bachis Midonga, the Su Yanda Bachis, the Jayanda Bachis, and the Dion Bachis, and the name Manguya dinner, that's delight so was. Sheba said to a Sheba near Legidua Yanda Bachis Midongo. Sheba is the dinner Midongo said the Manguya dinner, Bene Su Yanda Bachis, Jayanda Bachis, the Jayanda Bachis, Jayanda, Lyons Yanda Bachis, Yons, Yanda Bachis, Midon said the Negi Manguya, that the Negi Manguya to Chasa Sheba as a dinalma, the Su Jusade. That Chichir Shena said, that Yanda Bachis, Tungmares, and Maton with Jumten Carres, or that Chichir Shena said. That's on your Jumlen, Janju Semba Pape Kansati, Tombanila, Yaba Shayan de Gala, Sukta, Di Rores, Chukadejina, Rangu when you do the Tongumido, Rang when you do the Tonsan Mato, Rang when you do the Tongo Mare, Togo Mares, Rang when you do the Tonsan Togores. 제가 랑원의 주변 동배 동상 또제 랑원의 주바디 마동어도 김장 가르에서 제가 지시해 나서
He does not see a bodhisattva as real. Here the sutra has been abbreviated, as we can see indicated, because the sutra then would continue with other classes of phenomena, making the point that no phenomena appears as being established by way of its own side or as real. So, for example, the sutra would continue, stating that no form appears as real, no sound appears as real, no taste appears as real, etc. So here the quotation, His Holiness has abbreviated the quotation. Thereafter, comes the question word, why? Here now then follows the reason.
난 가르래라네 다 김제 마통 김제 가르래라네 야 상에 주면 되게 샤라 되디부 선에 미티기 민디 파 지샤라 되디부 데니 디데르 장슈 셈바 양 장슈 셈베 라신 동호 제사다 마통 김제 가르래라네 장슈 셈바 코론 속에 야 숙자지로서 바 되게 아니 코론 랑문이 주바 동바래 마도 랑문이 주비어 말해 제사 랑문이 주비 마주바에서 랑문이 주바도 통해요 말해 그 마주기네 자와기네 마주바로 와서 마주바에서 랑문이 주바 통해요 말해 디나이 장슈 셈바 코론이네 랑문이 마주바래서 제사 검자 유의되다 검과 장슈 셈바 코론이 랑문이 주바 마주바래 제사 랑문이 마주바인자 장슈 셈바 코론이 랑문이 주비 동바래 랑문이 주비 동바인자 아니 뭐 수자리로서 최근에 시나 뭐랑 원이 주비게 동발해 돼야 돼. 제가 파베님 제 제바지도 무인니스도 통고로 와. 무인니스도 가서 랑원이 주비 동발해. 제가 무인니스 랑원이 주비 동발 통고를 마도 랑원이 주비바디 마도 능고를 돼 무인니스 말해. 그요 말해. 제가 그 매반사 그 마통 말해서. 그 전시선바데 얘기 수다 자티로 라소바다 전시선바 코로나도 찾아 랑원이 주비 통고 말해 라소 되지. 마통 요즘제 가래선 랑원이 주비고 요코로 요 말해서. 랑원이 주비 동발해서. 제자디 전시선바 양다바 랑신이 동모서 제자 랑신 주비 동발해. 제자 랑신 동발해서 동사지 마도 랑원이 주바디 싸우기 매바로 와서 매반자 통해요 말해서.
The quotation continues. Here comes the reason why no phenomenon are seen that are established from their own side. Why? Shariputra, it is like this. Even a bodhisattva is empty of being an inherently existent bodhisattva. When emptiness is realized directly, in this case by a bodhisattva, all that appears is emptiness. No phenomenon appears as real, in other words, as being self-existent or being established by way of its own side. When reality is realized, the reality of how phenomena abide or how phenomena exist in reality, when that is realized, no essence that establishes the phenomenon is found. No self-existent nature is found. Rather, whatever that phenomenon may be, whether it's a form, a person, a sound, and so forth, when it's recognized or realized, how it abides in reality, only emptiness appears, because the reality of phenomena is emptiness. So the reason no self-existent phenomenon appears to an Arya being realizing emptiness, an Arya being realizing reality, is because no phenomenon is established by way of its own essence. No phenomenon is established from its own side. And therefore, because no such thing exists at all, it doesn't appear to the Arya Bodhisattva's direct realization of emptiness.
저기 장수 셈바 세디기 제산 장수 셈바의 랑원이 주요 말해라로와 다 장수 셈바의 랑원이 마주바 인자 랑원이 주바데 동바레스 Yina, and Jenju Sembadi, and the Meva Jenju Sembadi Rangun to Dong and the Jenju Meva de Velan, Jenju Sembadi Meva Mare, go and the Pumpong about Chilia, Shenchilla, doing the pa, Ming Tawatsum Yores, what I Jenju Yores, Jenju Sembadi Rangun when you do but Toma, Rangun when you do but Yomares, Toy Yomares. That you and Jenju Sembadi Toy Yomares, Jenju Sembadi Toy Yore, the Gandis Yores and Pa Mingi, Ming Tawatsum Yores.
The Bodhisattva realizes that the Bodhisattva themselves is not established from its own side, it's not self-existent, but rather is empty of existing in the way that it appears. But that does not mean that the Bodhisattva is now not existent. The Bodhisattva realizes that the Bodhisattva is empty of existing in the way that he or she appears, but that doesn't mean the Bodhisattva does not exist. It just doesn't exist. The Bodhisattva just doesn't exist in the way that he or she appears. The way the Bodhisattva exists is merely as an independence on imputation by mind, or labeling by mind. That is how the Bodhisattva exists. How the Bodhisattva does not exist is by way of its own essence, characteristics or nature.
Da Jenju Semba Koron Rangun when you tuba said your mares in a Ming Pa Lu Pa Taba Zim Yore Ming Taba Yores La Roda. That the lion and Jenju Sembe Ming said Rashin Tuba Reves. Jenju Sembe Ming di Rashin Tuba Reve Lana, Ming Amares Oda. Jenju Ming dia Yore in a Rashin Tuba Reves and Ming dia Rash to your mares. Jenju Sembe Ming Yang, Jenju Sembe Mingi Tongo. Jenju Sembe Ming Yang, Jenju Sembe Mingi Tongo. Jenju Semba Ming Pa Taba Ming Dai Ming Yorde, Jenju Semba Ming Horon Rashin Duba Revel and Diamares, Co Ming Horoya Tashan Jena, Niemava Tonshin Rang Wendy to be Tombares, or Jenju Sembe Ming Yang, Jenju Sembe Mingi Tongo, Sede, Tambo de Jenju Sembe Ming Horache, Nibadi, Jenju Sembe Mingi, Jenju Semba Rashin to be Ming the Tombares, she's a Ming Rashin Matubares. She's not in it, Jenju Sembe Ming Horoya Rashin Matubares. Jenju Sembe Ming Yang, Jenju Sembe Ming Tongo, said the Tongo, said the Rashin to be Tongo,
The Bodhisattva realizes that he or she is empty of an inherent existence. But that doesn't mean that the Bodhisattva doesn't exist at all, but he or she exists as a mere imputation by mind, or it's merely labeled by mind. But what about that imputation or that labeling? Does that exist? And then that is addressed then in the next sentence. So Shariputra, it is like this: even a bodhisattva is empty of being an inherently existent bodhisattva. A bodhisattva's name also is empty of being a bodhisattva's name. Just like the bodhisattva is empty of existing from its own side, so too is the name of the bodhisattva also empty of existing from its own side. The bodhisattva exists as a mere imputation by name, doesn't exist from its own side. The name that is imputed, this also does not exist from its own side, but exists as a mere imputation itself. So therefore, both the bodhisattva and the name that is labeled onto it are both empty of inherent existence, but still exist as a mere label.
And then in the Rangan Che condition, Rangan when you do by the Yomare Lavion, the Rangan to be Tombare, Lamsa, Tombare, Rangan to be Tombare Lavion, and Digi Shula Caragos in a Shenchilla, Tuche, Lupa, Tabats of Yore, said Go for Dagajan to Tico to go.
Here, what we're trying to get to in the meditation is through first or initially realizing that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. Through the power of that realization that the phenomenon is empty of inherent existence, one recognizes or realizes that it does still exist though, but merely labeled as a mere imputation by mind. So that through the power of the wisdom that realizes emptiness, through that the power of that realization, one realizes that the phenomenon, though, does exist, but merely labeled by mind. So this here is the very essence of what we've been looking at for so long. This and other teachings, the very essence of this meditation, is that one recognizes first how phenomena appear, then one investigates to see if the appearance is in accordance with the way it exists, if appearance and reality are in accordance or not, and one realizes the phenomenon is empty of existing in the way that it appears, cannot be found. The way that it appears by way of its own essence or nature, that nature or essence cannot be found. It is empty. But when one does not investigate, the phenomenon does exist. How so? Merely labeled by mind, merely imputed by mind. So this is the very essence of what we've been looking at. That when one investigates, only emptiness is found. But when one that does not, though, mean the phenomenon doesn't exist. It does exist, but not by way of its own essence, merely, only, just labeled by mind. And the initial realization should induce the subsequent realization.
Dakshin Jibets na Rang when you Juba Zawgin me Dongsanji, Dan and Chedike Pa Lu Pa, Shenji, doing the Lu Shapa, some Jidu, some Hagona, Azulia Jing Ganga said, and the Didu like and spring did some jig that Azuki Lamsan, the Hago to Matu.
If asked, why is this topic important? I'm confident you'll be able to say, because it will eliminate our suffering. That by realizing that phenomena do not exist in the way they appear, but exist as mere imputations by mind, by realizing this, we will eradicate suffering. But this reason, whilst correct, we need to understand it vividly clear, so that we can apply ourselves to realizing it.
I been Nanzulia Bene Magiba Chadi, Chika Kadichin Chawasana, and Chigan's Mission Chile Corner Savana, Mission Chile Corner Savana, and a Kadichin the Corner Sagiri said on that to Jevas de Susulia, Mission Dachilia, Makawaton, Corner Samno Shikeva, down to do Jevachevana, and corners and a Kadichi Savare do. That corner say, Gimsen did Yana. Passion Midige Sosolia, Sick member of Chilapche, Digi Nazo Amcho Coche, Di Genja Corona, Jigungurua. Yana, Passion Midigi, Lugi, Jelamta, and Lugi, Namur Tone, Nazolia Panet, Tonjam, Tomam, the nation, and the Dichane, Nazola, Corona, Jumtejungua, Casam Corona Langue, Nazo, Missionaji, Corona Bena. Corner language, Jumsen the Jews in another. Then I called corner Nassons. Now corner the Jumsen Carcian corner Nasson said, that was do she Shimju Chevena. Midela corner language. Midela and I corner Carci corner Nassons. Miji tick members lapche, near Quachin, then midela corner line, Chigungua, Jumsen Chigungua. Yana tick Malabena, Lugin, Namur down, quite Juba, Lugi, Jajugu Tone, Juba. The nigger so to get any toning, man's a corn lie at Yungurua, corn lie, the Jumsen Mason, the new Muduada.
So initially, we need to understand a topic intellectually, but that's insufficient. We need to gain experience of it. It needs to be integrated within us so as to transform our way of thinking. So let's take then as an illustration, if we encounter someone who is angry. So before us, we have a person who is angry. So we have an object and a person, or the anger, the perceived anger of the person before us. So this or any other object, we perhaps the anger of the person before us. Like all objects, it appears to us as being self-existent. This person appears to be real, their anger appears to be real, to be true, to be self-existent. But from our studies of this topic and our own lived experience, we can remind ourselves this person's, or this anger that has arisen in this person has come about in dependence on causes. This anger does not define the person. It's just something that has come about in dependence on causes. And we may be aware of those causes. We may have said something unkind, or we may be unaware of the causes. Perhaps someone else has said something unwanted. Or maybe the person is in a physically unhealthy, a poor condition, and their mind is disturbed by this. So we may be aware or unaware of the causes, but those causes could be from speech or something physical relating to the person. But those causes have led to the causes in dependence upon which the mind of anger in that person has arisen.
지산다 소소라랑 나눠주기 제바치 소소라랑게 냠린치도 삼다도 겁려야 소소라랑 콘로사한치제 파줘대 밑에를 콘로사도 되나 지산이 콘로사디 제간에 사버려서 내가 콘로사서 다 콘로싱이 간에 상송서데 콘로라야디 긴디 규디 가르쳐서 파심치도 미디잉알 찍두자이 랍제 가지고 고제 디 콘로랑송서 베다두신 아데지 코응알이야 찍두자이 라송 지산 찍두자디 디기네 고젠다 나디 직두제 그 직두제 일랍제 내가 때내가 코르라샤 세비게데 하고루하다.
And the speed and skill with which we recognize this is dependent on our own prior investigation of this topic. And when we investigate, we look in relation to ourselves, because we have all the same afflictions that we observe around us. We have plenty of experience of those ourselves. So we take illustrations of where we've got angry. And we'll recognize it's because someone has spoken to us in a way we find inappropriate, or perhaps there's some physical ailments that we are experiencing. So when our anger arises, it doesn't arise causelessly. It arises independent on causes. Therefore, it's not self-existent. It's a dependency. But the point I'm making here is that independence on our own analysis, coming to recognize and understand ourselves better, we can apply this to others.
지상아 주 미디를 콘라디 갑랑 삼는 나가서 미디 백초 초담제 백 지게 야고 매바게 남바로 시대도 가나 줄이야 미디를 코로 지게 야고 코롱머니 지 샹갈라마 코로 베랑머니 줍디켄데 짐바디 슉 담진 슉 첨부 지어라 가나 주길래 슉 첨부 지어라 받아 지상 데네 여바자다 데네 제바치도 당아주데 코에 직 두제랍 데라 데네 나 코로나샤 세 삼당여도 갑라야 다야 직제바 삼로다 니바디 가르쳐서네 직 두절라야디 직 되는 것나 가완 된바르스는 코에게 안에 욱다야다 제다 게임실에 된제 자 된바래 지산디 자디레마도 미디당 자니디네 가가레스 지상 안뇌야디 자디기 갈이야 직딩이 암출고제 딜은 뇌소래 이낭이 직델 콘라랑빈도 미델 콘랑도 와서 다심주시오로 와다 다 미델가 코라 가르실라 직델 가르친 콘 말라레 미델 가르친 콘 라레 사실 지라야도 갑려야 다두시데 직디 미디기 미델라 때네 직디 용어리겠어 지산 미디기 고 군노 삼당 알이야 남바 삼죄 기 직두자라에 군노 메나 직디 해요 말이지 지산 미델라 때네 직디 용어인자 아니 곧 미델링아 콘라샤스 지산 직델라 콘랑이 누워서지 당한도 두시네 삼당으로 와
When we sitting quietly and our mind is calm, we can recall a situation of where we did get angry at someone, and take using an illustration of when someone spoke to us in an unkind manner. We recall how we felt with the arisal of anger and how we perceived this person. And at a time like this, there's a clear relation between the strength of the affliction and the strength of our grasping mind. The more angry we are, the more upset we are, the more strongly we grasp at the object before us as being truly existent. To express it perhaps more clearly, the angrier we are, the more upset we are, the more strongly we grasp at this person as existing in the way that they appear to us. There's no doubt in our mind that this person is an awful person who said something awful, done something awful to us, and that they are a worthy recipient of our anger. So when we calm and quiet and we recall that, we can see the role that true grasping plays. There is no doubt in our mind this person is awful. What they've done is unforgivable, and they are worthy of our rage. Now, let's break that down a little bit, because we're not angry at the moment, we're just recalling. What has happened is this person's body, a collection of air coming out of their body, passing through the vocal cords and their mouth and tongue, making a particular structure, a sound has traveled across space and coming to our ear, and then entering our eardrum, and then consciousness, conceptual consciousness applies meaning to the vibrations of sound. And now, there's this whole long process which we ignore. We're not angry at their construction of sound that they have emitted. We're not angry at our thought process at perceiving or taking that sound and labeling it with specific words and meaning behind those words. Rather, our anger is solely directed at that person. At that person. Not the sound, not our interpretation of that sound, but at that person. And if asked why, clear. They wouldn't have made those sounds, said those words, without a motivation. So therefore we are angry at them.
다신 제베 천어 콘로서서 유디 유네 녀메 되게 제사다 안다 미세데 가르치다 네 콜 독시아레사데 가르레스는 그 직디 퇴제네 내가 때는 방이 코세등 아주 발로에 따와 삼시마도 된 엄마라 미드제네 그 풍부되네 녀미도 셈기 되네 녀미도 된 딜레 로소지네 미지 코세데 민도 제사면 자는 녀민도 와서도 진짜 다신 제바치어도 된 파초 미르디 아주 콘르치고 콘라스 자세 미디 발로에 따와 삼지마도 랑원에 주바시 메되게 제사 되네게 삼로지 레어도 되네게 삼로지 레어도 갑라 대신아도 배 두자레스면 콘로 사주겐데 셈디 마 시르고 그래 제사디 제사 민경 다여 좀 하고 해야 곧 랑신 강라마도 랑문이 주변 동바데 하고 해도 아주 콘로 깨디 녀마 콘로 깨디 그네 게레레 시르고 그래 근데 콘로 사바이네 마긴 차용 그래 제사 디 저기 녀모 바마 충다에 매가서야 페나로지 되는 중고래 제로
When we're recalling at this incident, we recognize now, because we've broken it up into parts, that we are angry with this person. And we know this is the case because every time we recall the incident, we are not angry with their body that propelled air in a particular way. We are not angry with the sound. We are not even angry with their motivation. We are angry with that person. This resentment towards a person that abides with us afterwards, especially when we recall the incident, it's directed at that person. Now we investigate, and we take all those component parts and say, which one is the person? Is the person their body? So the body that propelled air, and the vocal cords and the mouth and the tongue, is that the person? And we won't find that person that appears so vividly real within that. If we look within the sound that is propelled, the person's not in the sound. What about their motivation? Is the person that particular motivation at the time? That also isn't the person. So here we can utilize many of the varying techniques we've looked at over these months. And we'll come to find, wherever I look, I can't find a truly existent person. This person that I've been angry with, the object of my anger that was so just, so real, and the anger, thereby making the anger so justified, can't be found. When we recognize this, the tightness that has arisen within us as we recall the incident and the person will weaken. And we recognize that actually our way of thinking was mistaken. So whilst up to this point we've been pointing the finger of blame and scorn at this other person for their grave error, actually we are the ones who have made a mistake here. Believing this person to exist in a way that they do not. So this immediately will lighten our mind. It may even cause some joy, some relief to arise. And that relief comes from the tightness that we grasp at the object, the person as existing in the way that appears, this awful person, weakening. Because we realize they do not exist in this way at all. So this is how, through cultivating the wisdom, understanding, emptiness, our afflictions weaken. And as we gain ever more habituation to this, doing the same meditation with different illustrations again and again, we'll start to change how we relate to individuals as well as particular circumstances.
나와나 신아 대시 코르스디 겁레 초 탐제네 그런 거는 두바 나와나 신식 자오기네 매바 민경 따위에 잠지 하고 요도 아니 델리아 아니 파쇼미 델리아도 코르 기고 말 코르 리고 말에 리고 말와.
Doing these meditations, often we will no longer relate to objects as being existing in the way that they appear, we won't believe they are as fixed and static as they appear to us, but recognize that they are merely an imputation, exist merely as an imputation by mind. And the stronger this understanding is within us, the less afflicted we will be, the less likely we are to give rise to strong afflictions.
Peggy Tangmani may be a house watch, got Mill Naya de la Tadu Trabia Nangore, Tadu Trabia Nangore, Jetantia, Shenas, Joshu Nangor, Chipichigata, Mosuji, Jebana, Chipichigano, Nangor, the Ina, as the Comune may but how winter, as the lady Shenakiama, and the patriotic Conrokiama, cousin, got the key that did the Conroking Maro, cousin. Could Tabuchi now and Chipichina the Koshanawaya to the Tadu Trabja, the Hotag, Tubu, to Dujet, Nambu, Chipichica, Nango, Lola, Nango, the Ina, we Nisula, Tama, but the same time, my but how go and we how go and Lodi Yobanza, how go Lodi Yobanza, Cotinis Nana, Della Shanaki, Omar, Della Conor and Goma. As no we need to condition, but the Nanza Mato, to end the member, how go Kuyo Inza and Koshanaki Gomarva. That in a game, Hamoache, Bene Shimido, which take a Dushin, Tapanis, Shawan on Bachic, Dutch, Koshimitic, when he made some day when Pinish Shawan Bachic, Dutch, Chomo, but Shimiti Shadro, Shigro, Shenik, Dreadro, Krasanko, when there are some Kalnuris and Bishanaki, when there is something subject, when they mind how go Gomar. So then when there is something, it's good, Shigor, Dreadro. When he my body could not some mother done a memory sometimes Shenaki go, Mare. She's a dinner to do corners midi, Copatope, Palo, Tapas and Mato, Tashin Chibis, and Yam, Mindu, Sampig, Samochi, Winisula Mindu, Chesa, Winisula Palo, Tapatam, Redo Mato, Tashin Chibis, and around when you droop you can see the nigging Shang Alcon and the Mindu, Sample Samochi, how go you do? Then you want the answer control. Paniki, Namburu, that Java can still be there, the control the Pacific May, take a see Yamato control Java, and must do Shimjuchi to cover, then how would they control the by G to Ada, and they didn't need the around nutrition to us and some of the young.
Recall some of the videos you may well have seen on YouTube of an animal seeing its reflection in a mirror, or an animal seeing something on television and believing that what they're seeing exists in the way that it appears to them. We've seen the videos of perhaps a cat getting angry at its own reflection, thinking it's another cat that's invaded its territory, and it arches its back, its fur stands up, and it's ready to attack. Now, when we're watching this, our reaction is very different. The same thing is appearing to our consciousness as the cat. The same appearance is there. But the way we're relating to it is completely different. Because we understand reality better than a cat. We recognize that this is merely a reflection in a mirror. Likewise, if a cat is watching television and there's a tiger, maybe it's drawn to the television by the tiger's roar, and then if the tiger were to jump at the camera, the cat almost certainly would get a huge fright and run away. Because what is appearing to them, they're taking it to exist in the way that it appears. What is appearing to us, we know is deceptive. We know a tiger is not about to jump out of our television and attack us. So a key point here is, for both us and the cat, the object appears, the same object appears to us, but we recognize that that appearance is deceptive. The cat does not. When we do this meditation then, repeatedly over a sustained period, We recognize that phenomena do not exist in the way that they appear, but exist merely as imputations by mind, merely as imputations by our mind. Then why should we get angry at something that only exists as we are imputing it? Why should we be desirous or attached to something that only exists in the way that we are imputing onto it or labeling onto it? Seeing our error, our mind will relax and become more spacious. We won't be so drawn into life's events and dramas, but you'll recognize nothing exists in the way that it appears, but only exists in the way that our mind imputes on them.
대시 칙 독자 거에 대한 저게 암초 될라 때네 거얼마 암초 되면은 거요 말아. 제가 칙 독자 찍불라 나서 콘랑 거야 차고입니다. 되는 그 겐딜랑 가서 암초 되면은 거야 매버. 제가 니가게 비수 칙지 중 나서 암초 돼. 니가 초용될 겁라 나서려 초와래 깨지는 콘랑 거로와. 초와지 되는 콘랑 거로. 제가 다네 콘랑나 다 겐디가서 나 저기 겐디 콘라에 겐디 가서 암조지게 겐지기도 와 파조디에 자디게 가서 암 니가 겐지네 콘라마도 파조 자 지부랑기 지 콘라 가서 암조라 마템 바 콘라 자 지부랑게 가서 콘로게 되면도 와 벤 암조기네 메간줄레 펜디 갈라네 콘로게 콘로지 갈라기 나서마도 콘로게 스카요 마자데 마고나 제가 안면데 다른 거 지금 또 견제시 우두자시올라 나가 두스데 그 가지 구교다 동거도 자데 구교 말 제가 미디 가르치기나고 소나긴서 삼삼지 가른나긴 삼삼마도 그 견주 제바다 하고 간서 암좀 먹으러 와 내가 콘라요 말봐 제가 콘라이디 파초디기 칙 두자지에 라 데레 자디 중요제네 나서 암초다 니가 체네 니니 초발을 때네 아는 가줄이야 초와 주미지 얘기 되는 콘라사인 거로 와 제가 콘라사나 니가 사오마데 찌글 콘라사 찌글 마산데 딩고 장무 말어 와 이 장무지고 말. 제가 디네서 어떤 가서 암조디에 콘랑 거야 차고도 와. 어딘가 암조디에 배둑샤에서 콘랑 거야 차고도. 제가 딩한 저 지금입니다. 딩한 저게 삼다다데 다다 책요 말 와요.
Confident to say that to the extent that one recognizes that no phenomenon exists in the way that it appears, but only exists in the way that our mind imputes onto it. Our afflictions such as anger will rise far less frequently and be far less powerful. And a further way we can look at this is, for example, when we hear either an unpleasant sound or unwanted speech, remind ourselves that for this feeling, the suffering feeling that now has arisen to arise, that suffering feeling has come about in dependence on causes. The obvious cause is what the person said, or the sound that we heard, the unpleasant sound. But also, we needed our own ears. We needed to hear that sound. Because if the person was at a distance, and they were saying perhaps really awful things about us, but they were too far for us to hear a thing, we wouldn't be upset. We may see their mouth moving, but we think, well, maybe they're eating something. But our unhappy feeling could not have arisen. But when they come nearer, and they're still going on, saying all these awful things about us, the sound comes, and in dependence not just on the sound, but our own hearing, we then give rise to improper mental engagement, and then anger. So, should we really only be angry at that person? What about anger at our ear? Because our ear is a key part of this dependency. So if we want to get angry at some of the causes, surely we should get angry at all our causes. And we should feel anger towards our own ear.
지금 삼로디다 마튠바지 제연도 파셔디 고용도다 내가 코라사기로와 디 삼로 제사 나 주에 삼로다 미튠바지 지 소속이 되바데 미튠바지 아니 직제여도 파지 직제도 아니 나 저기 베네 자직 독자디 나 저기 되바요 말와 지난 되어 매진 직 독자도 고용도 땡아 저기야 아니 지게 콘란 거로와 지난 소속이 되바데 미튠바지 레어도 콘란 거로와 두 삼데 나가지고 나 콘을 간슬랑 것에 자지 권의 콘을 나서서 자지 권의 가르침 콘을 나서네 자디 알이야 직 두자라기도 직 두자데 나나 되어요 말했어 제가 나나 되어바데 메딘 바지기 라요도 나 콘을 거랬어 근데 나 저기 수고 장기 되어바데 메딘 바지 파시디기 제바로 직제여도 아니 딩아 콘을 거랬어 제가 랑기 되어바데 메딘 바지 레여도 나 콘랑도 와서 디 금전에 전에 지금 나 콘라데 랑 매바지 곧 되어바데 메딘 발레 디 견지도 콘랑 거랬어 디나진 디 금전에 제베나 미션다디 소송아우들 직 두제 지다 코직 직지 콘라지 라바이나 거기 가르친 라바르스네 콘라지 바로와 그런 거 되바데 미팅 바직 나주기다 지게 제주에 나가는다지 통고를 되는사 콘라 디기 견지네 콜라바 나주를 직 두제래 거 지나디 고 군롱을 마서는 그런래 되바데 미팅 바직 삼로지래 디 견체네 디 간절야다 파 직두자 라고스미 군원 내제 두스 라와레샤스 진짜 미코론라 라와가이 민도스 진짜 데니게 삼로 군롱 디 왕게 직두자 왕가래 코로나주에 차바레스 진짜 미코론라 라와미도 진짜 규단게 첸지라 되네고 아니 지 라와르마도 미코론게 라왕게 토네 말이야 독자치라 요리미도아 세베 제가 미코라나 라와민도아 세제 제가 데네 삼다데 미코라리아 아니 니지에 세베게 삼다 제 삼다데 고 지데 고 데네 코라 마키보요라 코라나 마키보 고 마키바 셈네 마키바 차바레 제가 마키어서 공화 강아요래 아치 니지에 세베게다 고 강아요데 강아딜레 타고 고자데 니지에 세베 삼로데 저게 고두 제심지에 삼다나 콜레 니지에게 삼르게 니주 고미야게 리그로마도 콜량아주 곧 콜레 뉴비지에게 곧 렌로에 삼나지 그 리그메바 인서로 고두 지나지 심주시데 콜 미고나 라메디게 슈 삼로 군노 디원게 직수지에 가서 균제지 콜하나 기우메바레 제가 기우메바레 닝제야 선배기다 기우메나 닝제 선배 삼로지 리도 인서로
Whilst every phenomenon appears to consciousness to exist in the way that it appears, and yet no phenomenon does exist in this way, in the illustration that we're looking at, so too with the words that this person has said. The words that they have said do not exist by their own nature. What they have said is sound that our ear consciousness has heard, then our mental consciousness labels or imputes meaning to it. So therefore, their words do not exist in the way they appear, but exist merely as imputations by mind. Moreover, our response to the words said, this doesn't exist in the nature of the words either. In that, if our response was governed or dictated by the words, we would have no choice. We would have to respond in this way, and so would everyone to such words. But what makes something as words a cause that leads to the arisal of our anger is that what is being said is not in accordance with our wishes. So merely or only just because what has been said is not in accordance with our wishes, an unhappy feeling arises. If what was said was in accordance with our wishes, a completely different feeling would arise, even to the same words, depending on whether they were in accordance with our wishes or not. Therefore, the words too do not exist in the way they appear. They only exist in the way that they are labeled by mind. So thinking in this way, we've come to understand that being angry at the person makes no sense, being angry at the words makes no sense. But we also come to recognize how much rests with us, because things only exist in the way that we label them, that we designate them. Then we also, maybe that's first, then maybe second, turn our attention to that person, who, if we are angry with them, we see them as a real object, worthy of anger, and very separate, disconnected from us. Appearing as truly existent, they appear unconnected, independent, and certainly from us too. But here actually we can remind ourselves that there isn't really any significant difference between us. Our feeling that arose in dependence on the words that we heard, this spontaneously, naturally arises. So too with this person, before emitting their words, they have their own particular wish, and in order to fulfill their wish, they spoke to us in this way. So this person is just acting under the influence of their desires, their wishes, wanting their lived experience to be in accordance with their particular desires at that moment. So this way, really there's no difference on this level. But where we can say that there's a difference is in dependence on our learning and our application in meditation. We are recognizing this. So we are having some influence on this situation. This person is completely without freedom and control. Their desires arise in their mind and it comes out of their mouth, and they are lost, controlled by their afflictions. When you recognize this, how is it appropriate to get angry or annoyed with someone who's acting without any freedom or control? Rather, compassion will arise with us. Our mind will remain patient and calm, despite perhaps the viciousness of what they've said. And this will enable compassion for the suffering being to arise. And then it'll be very easy for us to respond appropriately, because we are not afflicted. With a compassionate mind and an open heart, we can respond to them in a suitable manner.
Nenegi dan du shenanga zuke shimju shene sosuge da khonra sa khonra chipul samda benanga khonra sa be de sheba na jin ngarang khonra sa go gyu dan kin kan simgu du shimju she ananga pajo midile khonra sa sa midile ya khonra ka kan sa gi du shimju she ju che de anada ganzam jilya khonra sa se yu midi da shen che be sna ga nye me de ga ji sa da o ko pa le ba da ba sam chi me de ge chi ma do deni shime de mindu deni zada de khonra sa gi gyumse ro che du shene ne kunlong deni gi pajo deni chil de li gu du wa sam be ge du shene da shen che ba che ne ne pajo midi ya nye me de ga ma nye ba deni nyom mo ba kunlong khonra ge gi yu dan kin deni deni yung go ba de se bo chi ha ko deni ha ko de ka bla da nga ju ge 소수게 냠뇨도 진 삼다 냠뇨리도 갑라 지산 데네 삼다도 콘트리 기기 매바다 파쇼리아 콘트리 마기바다 현이나 콘트 마기바도 칸도 소수 콘트 기여 바네 녀마 기여 마 자투야다 안 마오바나 콘트 마기에게 다디 삼로 지 하고 특두 데네스도 삼다 바이나 다 콘트 소수기 콘트 마 자르야다 콘트 마기 녀모 마기바다 마기기 매바디 소수게 냠뇨도네도 지금 증오를 하고요도 되네 다 소수게 냠뇨도 하고요도 그라 다 현지 동아세다 현지 녀모 동아야 녀모 바디마 세고르와 셴야 디세야라 지산 탑람디 두 제자데 탑람디 삼로다나 탑람디 냠는 제주 콘솔 발랍제 콘솔 냠는 제주 삼는 땅 주고 있나 콘지게다네 녀모 바세 투야 두 셈비게 삼로실리도 거와 레어되는 현이 되는체야 현이 제바네 니도티게 체요야 아니 온도시네 연구를 해야지 그 송거와 To briefly recap some of these points that I've just made now, we need to start in our reflection to analyze ourselves. We need to come to know ourselves. We don't start by looking at others, because you'll just find we are pointing out the faults of others.
we need to come to know ourselves, recognize how our afflictions, such as anger, arise in dependence on causes, and therefore they are not self-existent, they are empty of being self-existent because they arise in dependence on causes. And this will give us some peace of mind towards our own strong, unwholesome habitual tendencies. We'll recognize that it's due to our habituation that we keep responding in a certain way. Then, apply this to what we observe in others, to specific situations and people, and also in general, recognizing that just like myself, their afflictions arise in dependence on causes. And the more frequently they act in a particular way, it's only due to the strength of their habituation. So just in the same way that I'm coming to understand and accept myself, so too should I understand and accept others. And also, the way phenomena appear is not how they exist. For example, my anger, it only came about in dependence on causes. Therefore, it doesn't exist from its own side, but it certainly does still exist. But how so? By being labeled by mind, or imputed, designated by mind. That's the only way it exists. How I label it, it serves in this way. It exists in this way. So too with others. We then recall specific instances of where, for example, someone spoke to us in an inappropriate manner, and then investigate that circumstance. Look for the person. We won't find them. Look for their motivation. So if we want to blame their way of thinking, that they're always like this, that they're always angry, look for that anger, and we'll see it doesn't exist. It's rather, it's a dependent arising, come about in dependence on causes and requiring labeling by mind. So too with their words. Their words aren't self-existent. They may appear to us as being self-existent, therefore we grasp at them so tightly. But these too are dependent arisings, therefore they don't exist from their own side, and they only exist by imputation or labeling by mind. So that in brief is the meditation that I've been outlining. The more frequently you engage in this meditation, the deeper your experience will be. And especially then when you recall it out of session as well, recall what you've meditated on out of session. This will serve to ensure that when one encounters unwanted circumstances, we'll more readily recall our meditation. And therefore, our afflictions, such as anger, will arise less frequently and be less powerful and be much less likely to overwhelm us. And that then also gives us the mental space to understand where this person is coming from. And therefore, compassion will readily arise within us. We'll want to respond in a way that's appropriate to the suffering mother being before us. And as we see this change in ourselves, not just that our mind is more peaceful when we meditate, but that we are able to deal with life's difficulties so much more skillfully, our motivation to continue in our training will grow, be ever easier to apply ourselves to the teachings, to reflect on them, and our wish to be of benefit to suffering beings will grow ever stronger as we are seeing the truth of the teachings through our own experience of our own inner transformation. We will want to become the most skilled of guides who can help others, guide others to recognize the causes of suffering and recognize the paths to cultivate, to eradicate their suffering. So in this way, we will strive ever more in terms of our own spiritual development.
지사생이 동아세다 네 디기 주베게 탑람디 하고 바이나 아니 탑람디 땡여 봐 하고 바이나 지사 아주 신기 동아시아라 디기투야리 아다디 그냥 아주 레가로 가레나 다가로와 레가데 소수기 제여바지 신규여바 제당 되는지네 디투투여바 하고다 어디에 제샤와서 이거 dumde오라 지도로와 지단디 마싱바이나 강아셔와 아디나시 신기 동아시아 디기투베 탑람디 디디 제젠디 강아시 투그레스베 하고 바이나 아니고 신기 된 두바일이야 아니지 지게 닝톱체래야다 안디 마제다 소소라는 게 있네. 아, 저게 된디기 녀모바데네 삼다나 녀모바데 마 매바 수에두도 매바 수에게 탑람 디두와서 하고 바이나 아니가 저게 산지고바 토야랴 냠내지야랴 안지 냠내지야랴 뽀뽀 숙체래야다 돈이 숙체래야 안디기 게가 저게 지기 탈바 탐지기고 고발라 타녀 줘야 제거로
Just like in your everyday life, you have many skills and talents. These skills and talents have been developed by acquiring knowledge and then gaining experience based on that knowledge. And if you encounter someone who's having some difficulty and you have the skill to help them, you'll readily show them how to fix something or create something that will ease their difficulties. And you'll readily offer your service because you have confidence in your skill. So too here, by gaining deep knowledge and integrating that within, so that one gains experience and skill, first on the meditation cushion, secondly in life's interactions. That leads to a deep confidence that one can encounter any situation and it will not overwhelm one. In fact, one will be able to deal with it skillfully, transform it skillfully. And with that confidence, one will both want to strive ever more in one's own spiritual development, and together with this, where one has the appropriate relationship, will be able to skillfully guide others and have a meaningful impact on their lives.
nyele kongro malamba nyomo majebe ne nyele ya do simju sheda tisi keba ne den yungure se te kare yungure se simju yare da nyomo bada chinga jo kongro la so bada deja la so bada ngai gero chi dini ke gero chi gena jesan du chine ne kan ski du yen ga rel tin yungu du da ke se de kare sha du simju chene ne simju sheba ina ne mo du chene ne tik sam da we ne ga zlia ji kan do yo ba ji 제거로 와디네 나도 진행하는 중이다. 단달라 꼭두 제바체제 강가라 랑문에 두바 싸워지네 민도스면 동사다. 안니까 스토스는 파 시행질을 되네 파를 따바 점지 두세 하고 봐. 네. 내가 되네 아주게 되시 디시아바 나신들 직녀모 배나 계획이 온고 마게 온고 쳐야다. 니마 계바이나 제수 파마 시줘야다. 안직생기 되는 제바네 니도 쳐야 랑기 안직에 탈바다 템지기 보고 발람냠내 제바이네 안직에 심쇼 쳐야다 니도 쳐야 돼. 안니 판도시 되는 용고래서 대한 주기지 다스 로프로로치 되네지. 주변에 되는 제사 되는 자당아도 두시네 삼당외에 계침을 책으로 와.
The time for engaging in this training is when one's mind is calm and peaceful, unafflicted. Then one has the mental space to recall difficult times when our pride arose, our attachment, our anger, and start out with where our pride was strong, or our attachment was strong, or our anger was strong, because then it's vividly clear how we grasped at the object as existing in the way that it appears. Look at the causes that lead to the arisal of the afflictions. And I encourage you to use real-world examples from your own experience, coming to recognize your habitual way of dealing with certain circumstances, come to recognize thereafter how things in those circumstances exist in reality. And thereby, to do that, you apply the techniques as mentioned in the last few segments. And then, as you start to see what leads to the arisal of your pride, anger, or attachment, and that none of the objects involved exist in the way they appear, whether the person, the consciousness, or another object, none of them exist in the way they appear. They're all empty of existing in the way they appear, but they only exist in the way that they are labeled or imputed by mind. We then come to understand reality. And then later, as we go about our daily events, with mindfulness, we can be aware that I'm now going into a situation where I am prone to giving rise to afflictions. My pride may arise, my anger or attachment. So I need to be on guard and apply the antidotes before the afflictions overwhelm me. And in this way, we can use what the experience we gain in meditation in our daily life by recognizing that no phenomenon exists in the way that it appears, but is empty of existing in the way that it appears, but it does exist, and it exists in the way that it's labeled by mind. And as we gain ever more experience, we'll have confidence that we can deal with life's challenges and difficulties, transforming them skillfully, and not adding to the burden of suffering and pain of others, but rather being a beneficial member of the community and easing the suffering burden that others carry. We can conclude at this point in the quotation, and we'll start there this afternoon. And if you have some questions, then please feel free to ask. Alan.
What's the definition of ultimate analysis?
What is the definition of ultimate analysis?
And what is the process? Okay. What is the definition? Start with that. What's the definition?
It is the wisdom realizing emptiness. It is the wisdom realizing emptiness. So it's usually translated as ultimate analysis. So what it refers to is analyzing the ultimate way of existing, or the ultimate way of abiding. So it is another way of expressing the wisdom realizing emptiness, and where the object is reality and comes to emptiness, and then there's the wisdom or the awareness investigating it. So it's just another way of saying wisdom realizing emptiness. Okay. Simple?
In the third line of the where it's talking about the 25,000 stanzas, it says the great being does not see a bodhisattva as real. So my question is that would only be referring to ascertaining the bodhisattva as real, because it wouldn't refer to the appearance. Is that right?
So the word see, he does not see a bodhisattva as real. Yes. So it is. I assume this isn't see as you see with your eye,
well,
but it's.
I know that.
Oh, okay.
It's it would be that they wouldn't ascertain that bodhisattva as real.
Okay. So they would. So does this mean that they wouldn't ascertain or realize the bodhisattva as real?
Yeah, because it would be a problem if they didn't have they would still have the appearance of the bodhisattva as real, even a non-Buddha.
Okay. So the bodhisattva would still appear as non-real because
would still appear as real.
As real, sorry,
yeah.
Because they're not a Buddha.
Yeah.
Sure.
通塞的俺这个米通塞了，但这通塞累怕通塞的累多把了过来，对，多把了过来。现在点把能够的别是能的能够了，别呢，真是什么说给为呢，东把你多把以内啊，那点把这边能够的别是能完的用过来，以内啊多了个嘛了哇。但是就说米通塞的让心这边东让心这边的通过嘛的，就像俺那搞的通过是东北个让心这边东北的多过来是。在让心主摆的多过嘛的时候，他通过嘛的时候，通没通是的，他通没通是多嘛多的需要。哦，你买的，这一级些别个通是一级些别通啊是
了。Good question, because this word see has a broader meaning in Tibetan than we would usually apply in English. So it is the word for see, but it has the same meaning as the word see, as in path of seeing. So here it refers to being in meditative equipoise. So the meaning of seeing is to realize. So yeah, so in English the word see doesn't mean the same as realize. But in Tibetan, it can be, as it does here, and it does as it does in the term path of seeing.
So it's in meditation?
Yes, in meditative equipoise.
Okay.
So he does not realize a bodhisattva is real, would be synonymous. Because the word see can mean realize.
Well, he is realizing the bodhisattvas.
As real as in truly existent. Okay.
In the third, we were going through the 3 verses, the 3 points. In the third one, a further consequence would be that production would not be ultimately refuted. What does it mean by production here? And that's one question. And the other one was, yesterday we were talking about basic designation. I was just thinking about it after class. And I just had a further question. We were talking about the table. So if the table is not inherently existent, from a Prasangika point of view, what is the basic designation then?
So with the third bullet point, a further consequence would be that production would not be ultimately refuted. So can Genla just say a little bit more on what is meant by production? And in terms of basis of designation, from the Prasangika point of view, with the example of a table.
So if the table is not inherently existent from a Prasangika point of view, then what is the basis of designation?
Okay, so if the table is not inherently existent, then what is the basis of designation? So the word production can be translated as a born or a rise. So the illustration is often a seed sprouts. So this process for a seed to sprout is production, or arising, or being born. So the meaning of production, so arise, so it's a verb, something arising or being produced. And then in this specific context, the Svatantika Svatantikas assert that everything exists inherently, including production. So they say that this process of production or arisal exists by way of its own nature. And the Prasangikas say, nothing exists by way of its own nature. If it did, it couldn't change. So production is a process of motion, of change. And if you, Svatantikas, say that production is inherently existent, it's unchanging. So there is a clear contradiction here. So so that's the meaning of production and what it means in the context here too. And then the second question.
Dakshisura, Ming Dayagi. Chisa Joxi Ming Dayagi, Shidi, Jixueshaguro, Shingi Jos in the Dawa Shingi Jixueshag, Gangbata Jixueshaguro. Della Joxi Ming Mataniela, Jos Malabniela, Jixueshaguro. Did Ming Dasaki Shidirwa. Chisan di Delia Joxi Ming Dagorwa. Then Jos Lapsave Gelatin Sudan, Jos Lagorwa. Dambo Jos Malabnielia, Jixueshaguro, Shingi, Gangbata Diwapa Jixueshaguro. Di Joxi Ming Dayagi Shidi dire. Di Denigi Shidi da Rangyubi Lamna Rangwen Jubarela Gore. Tenjubesna Rangwen Majubarela Gore, that Laptan Dini Chavashore.
The basis of designation for both Prasangika and Svatantika is the same. It is this phenomenon. Onto which, whether Svatantika or Prasangika, label table. So then to say it more clearly, but really it is just the phenomenon. Because as soon as one starts to describe the phenomenon, one's labeling. So we talk about that it's wooden, that it has a flat top and it has 4 legs. So immediately there's a whole process of labeling flat top, labeling legs, etc. But what is the basis of designation for both schools? It is this phenomenon, upon which then one labels, designates onto this basis, or labels, basis of labeling, basis of designation. That's the same. Where the dispute comes is, how does this table, or this basis of designation, exist in reality? And the one will say, by its own nature, and the other will say, that's impossible, it does not. But the basic basis of designation is the same. How it exists in reality is the dispute. Okay?
Adelia Rangon Juba said, Rangon Juba Labiodu, Chisan Tenjubu Labdu Kalsa, Rangon Juba Labio Mares, the Rangon Juba Ina, Gudan Kin, Matubache, Korong Jubachi Go or yes, Rangon Juba City, Danda Denich Go or yes, Chisan Gudan Kin, Shanla, Matubachi, Dubibachi Go or yes. Chisan Minta Saga de Chik Shurwa. Rangon Juban Mare Horgasne, Gangbada, Denigi Chasha Mambuji, doing it, Dom de can check to us. Chesa Rangon Juban, Denigi Changela, Maduba Jutuba de Lagores, Chesa Rangon Juba Lagioma, that's the word. Rangon Juba said, Donda de Carson, Shangela, Maduba Juba, said Gores. Shangela, Madun Juba de Marwas, the Single Secure that you sing go, then the Second Jalada, Mida, then a Mongolian, the Tubal, then it is Jubre. Then the Jups and the Cochos Mintagor was. Says that Rangon the Jubalana, Kala Mato Coron Tambon, then you hear the Chowers. Then you hear the Basin, good idea, Matua, Jubaina, then go to work in a dry meeting, and the child unit, then it's go. Says that, then it's a Rangon the Juba, the Labio Mares, and 10 years later, Rangibala. Rangon the Jubalam, the Tigoma, Dilamia, and Jun, then the Yungure said this more.
the distinction between the Svatantika and Prasangika is slight. So they would assert that this table is dependent on causes and dependent on parts. Both will assert this, but their understanding of what inherent existence or natural existence is, and the consequences of something existing by way of its own nature, that's where the distinction comes, the difference comes. So both would agree that for this table to have come about, it requires a number of causes as well as parts being gathered together. So causes need to be accumulated and parts would need to be gathered. The Prasangika would say every step of this process, both the table, its individual causes, its individual parts, and the gathering of the causes and the accumulation of the parts, every single step there lacks inherent existence. Svatantika say every step there is inherently existent. The table is inherently existent, each of its causes are, each of its parts are, the gathering, the accumulation, those verbs, all inherently existent. Otherwise they don't exist. Prasangika say, but if they were inherently existent, they'd be unchanging. They couldn't gather, they couldn't be accumulated. And moreover, if we looked from the perspective of the table, if the table were inherently existent, it would have existed before the causes were accumulated and the parts gathered, because its nature would have existed. So that's where the distinction comes between them.
ko ming ta sa shi di pa zene nye yo ba ko res rang yu be la da de zene nye yo ba ko res je sa nye me na ane ko ming ta ya hona rang ma res je sa ming ta sa shi di zene nye wo res nye ba ko res je sa de nye yo ba de la ra shin tu ba la gi res je sa de ra shin tu ba res ko ji si ko da tenjur be gi ming ta sa shi di pa chashi mangbu chi zom je drup du ba res ma do to ko chashi ge ge res zene nye yo ma res 아디 더코니 미투 바디 차베 직디기 랑주비게 민다사 시디 파제베나 녀요레서 텐주베나 민다사 시디 제네 녀요 말레서 더 민다 시디 쪽서디 신디 강바디레스 파샤디 강게 신디레스 파샤 텐신 파니 지 차시디기 파파바 직게신 제녀요 말레서 더 미투 바디 가르 차바스 딩이 직디기 제네 녀요레스 제사 라시 주바레스 tenjubiki zene nyeyo mares, ko chimju zena nyeyo mares, rashi maju bares. Donda di chabardi.
Prasangika will say, when you investigate the table itself, or if you investigate its individual parts or its individual causes, nothing can be found. Nothing exists by way of its own nature. Svatantika say, don't be ridiculous. If you investigate this table, you'll find its essence. And if you investigate its parts, you'll find the essence of its individual parts. And if you investigate its causes, you'll find the essence or the nature of those individual parts. Because if you didn't, it would not be suitable to be labeled. So if you couldn't find the essence of this table, it would not be suitable to be labeled table. It would be, in fact, no different from something non-existent, like the horns of a rabbit. So there is the clear distinction between the Svatantika and the Prasangika. Every part of the process, so we're using an object of form, but it would be the same if we're looking at consciousness. Every part is either inherently existent or empty of inherent existence. Prasangika say, this table is merely an accumulation of its parts that's come about in dependence on causes. That's all. There's no essence or nature to be found. And if you break up this table into its parts, you'll find a scattering of parts. You won't find a table at all. And if you break up an individual part, it too has its own parts. There is no table to be found anywhere. But Svatantrika cannot accept this, because they say there's then no difference between something existing and not existing. It has to have its own essence, its own nature, in order to be suitable to be labeled as something. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.